Jim Acosta, the lawsuit, the judge's ruling.
Right.
What's your take on what's been going on and what the judge kind of said today? I mean, because this is, you're covering it, but you also can provide a bit of analysis
I am,
as well.
as what they say in the legal community, an interested party.
You said it, not me. I love it.
Because I worked there.
Right.
I'm on the same front row that Jim Acosta is and that
right.
CNN is. So my takeaway initially is this is more about the fight than the law. CNN wants the fight. President Trump wants the fight. And even if he loses the fight legally, he believes he will reinforce the larger fight about decorum, respect for the presidency, the institution, and ways in which the media step over some lines and cross lines that they didn't cross. And the only reason they're crossing them is because he happens to be president. That is going to be part of an echo chamber regardless of where this lands, ultimately legally. I think there are absolutist positions having been taken in the legal papers filed on both sides. The government says it can revoke a hard pass under any set of circumstances. That's an absolutist position. Whatever you say, we can take it away from you by fiat under any set of circumstances. That's pretty intense. That's inviting and investing in the government large penalizing powers about access to a place. In this case, the White House, but it could be Congress, it could be the Pentagon, it could be someplace else in the future.
And the judge was concerned about
And the
that.
judge was legitimately, I think, concerned about it. The CNN position is also, to a certain degree, absolute. That there's no limits on the decorum in the White House. Well, I don't believe that as a reporter.
So there are limits.
I've exercised them. Your audience might remember a Rose Garden press conference we had just a couple of weeks ago. Now, I'm not holding myself up as the exemplar. I'm just saying what happened to me and the judgments I made. I was in the back of the Rose Garden. The president appeared to look right at me, point at me. I stood up. The White House aide handed me the microphone. And I began to ask my question. The president looked at me and said, "No, not you. Behind you." Signaling to Caitlin, who works for CNN, interestingly, in this case. I handed the microphone back, sat down.
Right.
Why? Was I giving up my First Amendment rights? No. The president said, "No, not you." It's his press conference. I'm either asked to ask a question, given that privilege and that responsibility, or I'm not. But guess who runs that? He does. And then someday she does, if it happens. But whoever the president is, chosen by the people. I'm chosen by my network to get a chance to ask that person chosen by the people a question. When he says, "No, not you," I handed the microphone back. Now, some colleagues of mine might say, "You coward, what's wrong with you? You clutch the microphone no matter what. You ask your question, you battle away." That's not where I come down on it. And like comedians who do not critique other comedians' jokes, I don't critique other reporters' questions. I do what I do for my network and for the public that I try to serve. But that's where I come down on that.
But this fight is clearly not over. I mean, this feels like, I mean, look, let's just be honest. We're talking here, oh, the cameras are rolling. But look, Jeff Zucker and Donald Trump have a history.
They do.
So, I mean, this feels like it's this temporary restraining order, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this just seems like the first battle in a longer war.
There are deep equities involved, and I'm not trying to be glib. The First Amendment is important. Due process is important. And the court is struggling with things that are not clearly defined in this clash. But I do think Jeff Zucker and Donald Trump want to have this fight on behalf of not just these serious and underlying legal questions, but on their own reputational relationship to one another. And this fight, which in the Trump era does feel at times inordinately personal and inordinately provocative. He brings that to the table. My own approach to that is to be as least emotional in reaction to that as possible.
Where, I guess we did talk a little bit about where this is going, but ultimately there is a concern, and I put out an article about this, kind of where we're in the age to a degree of the correspondent. This idea that you can be a correspondent by day and a pundit in that evening, nighttime block by night. And that
social media has fed that.
Right, and it's just a disservice, really, to the viewer out there, not quite sure. You're a correspondent, but you don't really quite sound like it at times. I'm not suggesting that's you. I'm just saying that there are people that have crossed over, but keeping the title of correspondent, and that seems like a big danger.
David, I'm asked all the time in airports and train stations where I'm seen in public, who do I believe? Who do I listen to? Who can I trust? That's a heavy question, and it didn't seem to me like our industry got asked that question the way it gets asked now. And we have to own up to that. When they're asking us if we're believable, then we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. And this blurring of being a correspondent and being a pundit, or being an analyst while you're a correspondent. Now, some have said about my book, wow, you wrote a book while you're covering the story. Is that really proper? And what I try to do in the book is walk that very journalistic line. If there are points in the book that are critical of the president, it's where things that the White House said or the president said that didn't, in the end, add up to the facts that they themselves later pointed to. That's a fair journalistic appraisal. There's nothing commentary or punditry about that. But I do try to avoid that sense that I'm striking a pose and I'm giving you an editorial judgment. But lots of other reporters have strayed, I think, and social media has certainly been a temptation in that, big time temptation. And when the public is asking those of us who are frontline reporters, who can they believe, they're essentially saying, we're not sure we can believe you. That's our problem of our creation, and we have got to own up to that, and we have got to reverse that trend line.
Before I ask you one last question about the book, one last thing on the Acosta or the whole CNN lawsuit. Just so I understand, there isn't a First Amendment right for reporters to be on the grounds of the White House, right? I mean, what's the situation there?
So,
I mean, that's a I don't want to call it a privilege. What word would you use?
So,
I mean, could Trump literally just say, and it would be horrible PR-wise, but could he technically say, sorry?
So I have a memory of this dealing with the George W. Bush presidency, because there was a renovation, you may recall it, of the workplaces that the White House press corps had on the White House grounds. And for a period of time during that renovation, all of the White House reporters were off-site across in an office building on Lafayette Square. And there was a conversation then, wouldn't you all like to stay there? More bathroom space, a bigger break room, bigger offices, better technology. And all the White House correspondents said, no, we want to be inside. We want to be inside the gate. To have that physical proximity to the briefing room, to whatever aides may come out for interviews on the North Lawn, et cetera, et cetera. So this question has been asked and conceptually explored before, meaning your offices will be off-site. Not by this president, but by George W. Bush. Thinking of that as a workspace convenience question, but we viewed it as no access, geography, proximity. Guess what? The First Amendment doesn't get involved in any of that. Okay? The First Amendment is about our right to publish, the rules under which we publish, and the responsibilities and equities under that publishing right afforded to us by the First Amendment. Quite happily, the First Amendment does not get involved in convenience, security, or geography. Guess what? We deal with that face to face with our deportment, our comportment, our responsibilities, and our interaction with the government itself. It ought to be negotiable at that close range. And thank God we don't ask the First Amendment to get involved in geography, convenience, or security.